Hi everybody. I'm going to show you a project today that's going to take a little bit more time. It's a little more complicated, but I think the results are really well worth it. We're going to do a covered casserole, and it's going to be round, so it's just a thrown base and a thrown lid, but it's going to introduce you to making parts that fit together and also how to make lids on pieces that are wider than 4 inches. You can't just make a flat disc lid on a piece that's that wide or it may cave in during the firing. So we're going to learn how to throw the lid upside down and invert it and trim it to final shape. So bear with me as we go through all these different steps. I'm going to start out with just throwing the base and taking some measurements, and we'll carry on from there, making the lid, putting handles on, putting a knob on the lid, and eventually having a really nice piece that you could go oven to table with and be really proud to share with your family. I've got a 5-pound ball of clay queued up here and ready to go, and we're going to throw it into the base of this casserole. My plan is to leave enough thickness in the floor that I will be able to trim a shallow hollowed out foot ring so that I can get glaze on both sides of the pot, the interior and also the underside of the piece, everywhere except for the foot ring. And that's going to make the piece a lot more stable in terms of tension that the glaze applies onto the clay when it's cooling off in the kiln, and also when you put it in and out of the oven. So it's definitely an option just to take it down to a 1/4 inch and not trim, and you can use less clay, but I'm planning on trimming. So let's get started, center this thing up, and see how we go. Because I'm going to need to make a lid that fits this, I need to be a little bit more careful than if I was just making, say, a salad bowl, to keep everything really well centered and balanced. So I'm taking it out, but I'm really keeping the edge sealed. I need to spread this a little bit further. I want to make sure that my base is the size that I'm after before I start bringing the walls out. So I'm keeping my left hand pressed against the side as I'm drawing this clay out wider, and that's helping me establish a nice base diameter. Now I'm going to go ahead and open down in the center and check that thickness and see if I'm getting about a 3/8 inch, maybe slightly thicker. I'm still really thick. I'm a good inch at the moment, so I'm going to take that deeper and check it again. Now I'm down to about a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to stop making it deeper in the center, and I'm going to go ahead and pull some clay out. Now I want to point out this little ridge here. When you're making big pots like this, platters, plates, casserole dishes, you need to make sure that the thickness of the clay stays pretty flat and compressed as you bring it out. Because if this ridge kind of raises up even more as I'm pulling out, the goo that's next to it can get trapped underneath it, and at that point it's really easy for that whole ring of clay, instead of just moving out where you want it, to just tear off. So I'm going to go and put the side of my fist down on top of that ridge. I'm going to pull the clay out by pushing my own thumb down, and it's keeping everything nice and flat as I bring that wall out. And I can come back and kind of feel and see, okay, yeah, that feels pretty good. It's pretty level. And I'm moving this thickness out to the perimeter of the pot. I'm gonna come back in and sort of get a few ideas of depth as I go along. So I've got a little bit of a lower spot there. It's a little more than 3/8. Let's check the center. Again, a little bit more than 3/8. So I can bring a little bit more clay out, but this is about where I want to be in order to be able to trim a nice foot. I'm going to compress and just draw out a little bit. Just keeping everything flat and compressed. And eventually I'm going to come in with a nice flat rib and really just consolidate all of this. So at this point, I can go ahead and start making the wall of this piece. So I've got this thick donut of clay. I want to stay down here at the bottom. Do not push down with this left hand. If you push down on the thickness of the bottom, you're going to make it too thin right around the perimeter, and that's right where you're wanting to make your foot. So kind of pushing out towards my right hand with my left hand, and then I'm going to draw this clay up and slightly out. I'm stopping below the rim and releasing slowly so that I'm leaving extra material here to form a nice sturdy rim on this piece. You have to remember you're going to be dealing with this piece when it's hot perhaps, and you're going to be putting another lid on there that is also made from clay, and when clay meets clay, there's always a chance for chipping. So you want to make sure you got enough material you can make a nice rounded, secure lip on this. So let's come back in and just make sure we're not leaving behind any material that's useful to us at the very base of this wall. All right. So that gives us enough depth that we can get some good amount of food in there. And I'm still good as far as having a nice thick rounded rim here. Before I do any shaping, I want to go ahead and take my wood knife and trim off some excess at the base on the outside. So I'm just going to make sure my wood knife is clean, and I'm going to just slice some off. When we make stoneware pieces, they're not meant to be put over a direct source of heat, but I have found that they perform fairly well in the oven as long as you don't sort of push your luck and really shock them from cold to hot. One of the things that really helps with that is making sure the walls are fairly even in thickness everywhere. You don't want them thin, you don't want them extra thick. The point is just nice, even, uniform thickness. Now let's go ahead and compress this floor and flatten it out. As much as I love to leave evidence of process and to leave the texture that's made by my fingers, for a pot that you're going to have to potentially be scraping melted cheese out of or something along those lines, it's nice to have it pretty smooth. So I'm going in. This rib is interesting. It's basically mostly flat sides with a sharp point, a dull point, a really rounded point, and a intermediate rounded point. And so you can probably see in the floor there, I went in and I had my sharp point facing to the right. And so it kind of gouged and made a little ridge there. So I'm not super happy about that. I'm gonna kind of flatten it down with my finger. And then I'm gonna come in and turn that rib around. So I've got the rounded corner. I'm gonna work that out until I get right near the corner. I'm gonna kind of compress and smooth out that bottom. And then I'm gonna turn it around and use the intermediately rounded corner, this one here, to finish off that bottom. And I'm going to support on the outside so I don't stretch the wall. But I want to create a round over. It'll be easier to clean. So I just kind of took some of the gooey clay out of there. And then finally, I'm just going to go to the rib that I'm used to using, which is this yellow Cheryl mud tool rib. And I'm going to grab my metal rib for the outside. And I'm just going to compress the wall. So I dealt with the floor first. I got it compressed, dried out. Now I'm going to come in and deal with this wall. I'm stopping below the rim so that I don't compress the rim any thinner than it already is. And it gives me a little bit of a detail on the outside, and then I'm going to take my chamois and just make sure again that everything is really round and compressed. I definitely don't want to have any sharp edges where that lid is going to meet the casserole. Now you might be wondering, wait a second, how are you going to put a lid on here? There's no gallery for the lid to sit on. And I feel like on cooking pots, it's a lot easier to clean them if the flange that keeps the lid from sliding side to side is actually part of the lid rather than part of the base. Having a nice smooth transition is just easier in terms of glazing and in terms of cleaning these pieces. So that's the approach we're going to take. I also like that this rim slightly curves inward so that there's going to be a little extra space for that flange to hang down into the interior without getting stuck with the glaze. Really always have to be thinking ahead to future steps when you're making pots. You know, how am I going to hold on to this to glaze it? How am I going to have the two pieces get fired together? And you absolutely, a casserole dish like this, you absolutely fire together in the kiln so that if there's any tendency for it to warp, the lid's on there to keep everything meeting up nice and round. So that's pretty much it for the base. If you wanted to come in and make some extra little details, you could probably use your rib with the corner side facing in and follow it up and kind of press a little corner in just to give it a little something interesting at the edge. It's absolutely not necessary. It's just it's a way to give it some life and some detail that otherwise it would just look kind of round and boring. So I'm going to clean up my hands and get a new bat put on, and we'll show you how to take a measurement of this and go ahead and make that lid. I'm not actually going to wire this pot off. Normally, if I was making a piece on a bat, I would run the wire under it and just set it aside. But in this case, I actually want to have the option to flip this whole piece upside down without it falling off the bat. So I'm going to hold off on wiring off. I am going to take a measurement, and for those of you who are looking at what I'm doing in horror, yes, I am using these calipers incorrectly. Technically, I should have them crossed so that I can come inside and measure from inside rim to inside rim, but I know that there's going to be a little fiddling around to get this to fit, so I'm just coming above it and eyeballing, and I am measuring the distance from inside edge to inside edge, and that's going to tell me the diameter that I need to fit the little vertical flange on the lid that I'm about to make inside of. So I'm going to set this aside and go ahead and set this whole bat aside, and then we're going to go ahead and make the lid. My bat pin got stuck in the bat here. All right, so setting that substantial base to one side. It does feel on the heavy side because it was made with 5 pounds of clay, but there's going to be some trimming. And these things don't have to be lightweight. Let's go ahead and take this next piece, which is close to 5 pounds as well, and center it on this bat and show you how to form this lid. Quick word about proportions. If you look at a casserole and the dome of the lid is about the same height as the base of the casserole, it just doesn't look quite right. So we're going to try to use the 2/3, 1/3 rule, try to get that lid to be half as tall as the casserole. So this is basically going to be like a plate with a really thick rim that we're going to split, and the inner half of the split is going to get folded up to form a flange that'll fit inside of the casserole. The outer part of the fold is going to be straight out so that it has something to sit on the rim of the base with. So again, accuracy is important, so I'm going to take my time and really make sure I get this well centered. That's feeling pretty good. And then we're going to start spreading this out. So I start out just by pushing down with my left finger eminence on top of the clay. My right hand is keeping the clay sealed to the wheel, and my fingers are staying one on top of the other, so I keep a nice vertical edge here. That's super important You don't want to let it lop over onto some goopy stuff. I'm going to go ahead and push down on the center. I'm using my thumb like I would open a bowl, but instead of just 2 fingers on my thumb, I'm putting my fist over my thumb and pressing down. Got the sponge in my hand in case I get dry. I can add water. And then I'm going to draw the clay back toward my chair. And that pressure from the side of my right hand and from the whole length of my thumb keeps that clay nice and compressed and flat, so we don't get that issue with things rolling over and trapping goo pockets inside. All right, so let's just get a feel for how thick that is in the middle. I don't need to leave a lot of extra thickness because I'm going to be trimming this, but I'm not hollowing it out. I'm just going to be rounding it off. So I can take this down close to 1/4 inch. We're over 1/2 inch at the moment, so I can go a little bit deeper. And it needs to get thicker as it goes out, because this is going to be a dome. This isn't a flat thing with a vertical wall. It's basically like a super, super shallow bowl. So that's what I'm working on, is that curve. And then I find it helpful, even before I get anywhere near, just to take the calipers and kind of give myself an idea of where am I shooting for the center of that rim. And you can see it's not really very far beyond where I am right now. So let me just recheck the thickness in the center. We're looking like almost 1/2 inch, something between 3/8 and 1/2 inch. So I'm going to just bring that down a little bit more. I don't need to leave too much there. And I'm letting my hand rise up as I come out to the edge. And I'll come in here with a rib and kind of make sure I like this curve. When I use the rib, it's actually using a fair amount of pressure. And right now I'm pushing down against a bat underneath, so I don't have anything to worry about. I can press that clay pretty hard. And I'm using the side of the rib, not the edge of the rib, and I'm pressing with the side of the rib. And as long as I don't let too much clay build up on there, it'll just compress the clay, smooth it out, and make a really nice line. Okay, let's attend to this rim and form what will be the flange and the part that sticks out over the rim. So I'm going to just get another visual. It doesn't have to be much wider at all. I'm going to take and barely throw this lip. I'm going to reach my fingers up underneath that edge. I was noticing that my left-hand fingers were sticking partly on this, so I'm going to re-wet that because you don't want to pull it off center at this stage. All right, and I'm going to dug underneath. I'm going to pull this just a little bit up and out. And then I'm going to stop and recheck with that caliper because I don't want to get it wider than I need. It's really hard to bring them back in. So the outside edge of this is where it needs to be, but I need to have the center of this thick rim end up being pretty much right on my caliper mark. I'm going to bring it out a little bit more. Excellent. I'm going to stop and check again. We're getting there. So I'm thinking that at this point, I may go ahead and do my splitting. I'm looking at the height, and it is about half the height of the casserole. So that's on track. Let's go ahead and take the wood knife and split this rim. So I need to kind of feel where the thickness is. And it is actually pretty rounded through there, which is good. I'm gonna split it, but I need to split it back towards the center. If I split straight down, I'm gonna kind of just cut off the outside edge. So I've got to turn my body and turn my wood knife to an angle that's gonna cut through the middle of that clay. Okay, excellent. So that is now split in half. And I think that when I fold that up, it's going to be just about right. It may require a little bit of stretching out. So what I need to do is get in there. I'm going to use the back end of my wood knife and press it down into the groove until it hits the bottom of the groove. And I'm going to kind of roll that clay upright. And that created a nice deep flange that'll fit down into my casserole and keep it from veering off the top of the pot. It is significantly smaller than it needs to be, which is good, because it's much easier to bring it out than it is to push something back in. So I'm going to take this time, while things are fairly stable, to compress the edges. Because again, we don't want anything that's going to be super chippy and fragile. So that's compressed. Let's compress this outside edge, get some of the goop off the chamois. We are eventually going to lay this horizontal flange out more horizontally, but right now I just want to get it pressed clean. And then I'm actually going to take the back of that wood knife and just clean that corner. So I'm just going to press it gently right into that juncture and compress anything so that there's just a nice, neat spot there. All right, let's figure out just how much we need to stretch this out to get it to fit. So it looks like about 1/2 inch. So I can actually reach under there and move this whole wall wider. I'm gonna stop and check. Now we're getting real close. Now it's super close, within maybe 1/16 of an inch, but let's look at this, what I'm calling the vertical flange. I actually want it to end up being not perfectly vertical, but slightly tipped inward, so that the part that would go into the casserole first is on the small side. That means it can get in there without chipping, and then it'll kind of find its way down to the perfect fit. Because it's tapered, it angles slightly inward. And I had to put water back on this inside of the lid in order to throw that last bit. So I'm gonna come in with the rib before I even finalize that fit and just re-rib and smooth out that inside and get rid of all this slurry. That's not helpful to leave that in there. All right, ran that rib all the way up into that corner. And let's give that a final check with the calipers. That is fitting really nice. Okay, so I'm gonna try not to mess with anything inside of the flange. I lied, I just can't stand it. I need to go in there one more time with this rib. All right, now I'm pretty much satisfied, pretty much. I'm being really picky. There was just kind of a funny little indentation there, and I want the glaze to just lay on that really nice and smooth. Okay, let's talk about this horizontal component here. There's no reason for it to kind of pinch down on the lip of the casserole. So we're gonna just grab a hold of it with our chamois and lay it down fully horizontally, instead of having it slightly tip upward. And you'd think, oh gosh, if I get it out completely horizontal, it's gonna collapse, but it's thick enough that we'll get away with it. So I'm wrapping my middle finger of my right hand up underneath that edge with the chamois. And then I'm gonna just use the index finger of that same hand and press down and create almost like a little rounded pocket for the rim of the casserole to sit in. All right, now there is going to be a lot of trimming to do to finish the bottom of this. There's a lot of extra clay at the edges, and that's totally fine. There's no harm in that at all. I'm gonna end up having to wedge that clay back up, but I would rather leave all that support instead of trying to extend this complicated edge out really far, where I'm gonna have to then worry about the whole thing collapsing. By leaving the support, only about an inch from the edge, this is a fairly low stress throwing activity. I do want to take my wood knife and just make a little bit of an angle. First, I'm going to get the goo out from underneath here. Kind of scrape all this stuff out. And then I'm just going to take the point of the knife and stick it in at the juncture between the bat and the base of the piece. I'm not actually removing anything. This is just making a little spot for my wire tool to track nice and neatly under the pot. If I don't do that, the little flare of clay tends to pick up the edge of your, or the loop of your wire tool and raise it right as you're trying to come flat underneath the pot. So by making that little groove, this is super, super helpful for plates, bigger bowls. You're not trying to really do anything to finish the foot. You're just making a little groove right at the base so that your wire starts out tracking against the bat and it'll come under nice and neat. That's pretty much all I can do until these pieces have, well, in my garage, probably a day to dry to leather hard. So I'm going to leave it here and come back when everything is ready for the next stage and show you how to finesse the fit of the lid and trim the dome of the lid. And then we'll do all the fun additions, handles on the side and a knob or handle on top.